The EPA's controversial endangerment finding just received its first legal challenge. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association has filed lawsuit in D.C. Circuit Court, hoping to halt the EPA's plans to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act. Clean Sky's Dan Goldstein is in the newsroom with more. Dan.
Yeah, hey Susan, and you can bet that this is going to be only the first of probably a slew of industry-related lawsuits hoping to halt the EPA in its tracks when it comes to this endangerment finding. Now, in the NCBA, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association suit, their filing, they said the EPA, according to them, did not use sound science in formulating its decision. They also contend, of course, like many other industry groups, that they don't believe that the Clean Air Act is the appropriate vehicle to regulate those 6 greenhouse gases. And they also point to, you can imagine, ClimateGate, that came up again, that they said those emails showed that, those emails from the University of East Anglia, that is, showed that at least that seems to be proof that the climate science is not settled, at least for the EPA to regulate. Now, this is not the first time, Susan, that farmers have clashed with the EPA. Farmers clashed during the Waxman-Markey bill markup, especially the USDA, or at least farmers won an agreement that the USDA, not the EPA, would oversee agriculture-related carbon offset programs, and that was a big part to do with Colin Peterson, who's the House Agriculture Committee chairman. He won that concession, threatening basically to pull the support of 20-plus farm state Democrats who wouldn't vote for the bill otherwise unless that protection was in there. And their concern, obviously, today is that if this goes the regulatory route, that protection that was worked into the Waxman-Markey bill, Susan, may not be in there if the EPA regulates. Now, what does this have to do with the cattlemen? Now, I'll tell you, methane. Much of this has to do with basically cows and their production of manure. Now, we know where that manure goes. It mainly goes back to fertilizing fields, but what do you got to do with the manure in the meantime? That has to be stored, and when it's stored, it creates methane. Now, here's the big deal, is that methane is 21 times as potent a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide. And NCBA points out that even though the agriculture sector represents only 6% of greenhouse gas emissions and livestock represents 3% of that, that 21 times number basically means they see a target on their back. Here's what NCBA said upon filing suit. Basically, because of this rule, quote, EPA will only be able to tell farmers that they can only emit a certain level of greenhouse gases. If they go over that amount, they can incur severe penalties and be forced to curtail production. That, of course, is from the EPA, from the NCBA's chief legal counsel. This, of course, is just one of a slew of efforts, probably on the most part of industry and Republicans, to halt what they see as the EPA's remorseless march to regulating greenhouse gas under the Clean Air Act, under the endangerment findings. Susan, we'll probably see Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska next month try to halt this with the basically preventing the EPA from going forward with a resolution, almost a sense of the Senate resolution, disapproving of what the EPA is doing with the greenhouse gas emissions, with the endangerment finding. Now, analysts I talked to said that resolution could get more than 50 votes next year when it comes up. And while that might be an embarrassment to the administration, it would be unlikely to get enough to sustain a presidential veto, and moreover, it would probably not get the 218 votes that it might need in the House to get a similar approach. But bottom line, Republicans are going to try that, and we've heard that House Energy Committee Ranking Member Joe Barton is going to offer that kind of resolution. That being said, the news about the NCBA's suit is probably just a slew of many other lawsuits that are going to come down the pike. And I talked to some industry analysts today, and they said this may be their only recourse because they don't have a legislative option. They don't have the power to force the votes, especially in Congress, Susan.
Right. So many efforts, Dan, to halt EPA. What does the agency say in response?
Yeah, well, the EPA was in the process of getting back to us when we went to air, but here's what we do know. The EPA has long said, Susan, that they believe that the science is sound and that it will hold up in court. And obviously, they have the 2007 Supreme Court ruling in their back pocket as precedent, Susan.
Right. All right, Dan Goldstein, thank you.
You bet.